You're traveling through another podcast. A podcast not only of reviewing and discussing, but of discovery. A journey into a wondrous show whose boundaries are that of imagination. That's the RSS feed up ahead. Your next stop, Anthology.
Hello and welcome to Anthology, presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. I'm your host, Matt Hurt, and if this is your first time listening, Anthology is one man's examination of the Twilight Zone as a first-time viewer. Each podcast, I share my first impressions, analysis, and overall thoughts on Rod Serling's iconic series, one episode at a time. I also cover modern anthology science fiction series, such as Black Mirror and Jordan Peele's Twilight Zone reboot, in bonus episode review series. You can find more of Anthology, as well as a full episode archive at anthologypod.com. And if you want to contact me, you can use the Facebook page at facebook.com/anthologypod, tweet me at OVAnthologypod, or send an email to matt@obsessiveviewer.com. And today on the podcast, I will be discussing the Odyssey of Flight 33. It's the 18th episode of the Twilight Zone's second season, and it originally aired on February 24th, 1961. And yeah, that's what I'll be doing today. I do want to mention, I should really make a habit of doing this every episode, but thank you to Tony Troxel from GeekingInIndiana.com and the Indiana Geeking Podcast and the whole Geeking in Indiana family of podcasts for providing the opening narration for the podcast here over the Twilight Zone theme music. So thanks, Tony, and check out GeekingInIndiana.com. Yeah, before I get into the episode and everything, I do have a couple of pieces of housekeeping. First, I bought a new Twilight Zone shirt, at, tpublic.com. That's where I get a lot of my shirts. It's kind of pricey, but, sort of, but it's really good to kind of get some cool, t-shirts. But anyway, I recently bought one that's, pretty cool. I'll put a link in the show notes, but it's basically it's a silhouette of Serling's head, and inside, like, where the brain is, it's just a bunch of, like, references to the Twilight Zone, like, different things here and there. It's really cool, and has, like, kind of the white spiral, behind it. It's a pretty cool shirt. And then I also bought a shirt that's it just says the Twilight Zone and has, like, a star map and everything. Anyway, so I was just excited about that. And also, make sure if you want to support the podcast, a good way to do that is by buying an Anthology shirt, from TeePublic. We have an Obsessive Viewer merch store on tpublic.com, and, included in that merch is, Anthology. You can get a t-shirt with the Anthology logo, which I think looks pretty sharp. So, check that out. Links in the show notes, all that. Yeah, and final piece of housekeeping is thank you to Horror Movie Yearbook. It's this great podcast where over at ObsessiveViewer.com we've collaborated with them and the whole Midwest Podcast Network in the past. But Horror Movie Yearbook is a podcast that kind of is a deep dive into horror movies, and they take different horror movies from the same year and kind of compare and contrast them with the current events of the time and everything. And they have, like, fun bonus episodes, and it's a really fun podcast. But anyway, they released a bonus episode just recently, like within the past couple of days, I think. And they gave me a nice shout out because they talked about Jordan Peele's new Twilight Zone reboot, and they kind of mentioned me by name, and said, and I quote, he knows his Twilight Zone stuff, so I'm fooling someone. But anyway, thank you to Horror Movie Yearbook. You can check them out on Twitter at HMYearbook and at horrormovieyearbook.com. So, that'll do it for housekeeping and everything. Let's dive into the Odyssey of Flight 33. Now, of course, I'm going to, read a plot summary courtesy of The Twilight Zone: Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic by Martin Grams Jr. This plot description and the review that follows is going to be extremely spoiler heavy, so I'm going to, warn you that if you haven't seen the episode and you don't want to be spoiled, why are you listening to this? And go back, watch it on any of the streaming platforms it's available on, or DVD or Blu-ray, and then come back and listen to my review. So, warning out of the way, here's the plot description for the Odyssey of Flight 33. Global Airlines Flight 33, a passenger jet airliner 4 minutes behind the flight plan, picks up a freak tailwind and finds itself traveling at a supersonic speed. After a flash of light and a deafening roar, the passengers and crew find themselves in a situation that could only be written off as an atmosphere phenomenon. No radio contact can be established, and in an effort to make visual contact, the plane drops to a lower elevation to discover they have traveled smack dab in the middle of the prehistoric period. Captain Farver, in command of the jet airliner, knows that they cannot possibly land in this era. He orders the crew to attempt a recreation of the same situation that occurred, hoping to travel back to the present. Picking up the same freak tailwind, the airliner manages to travel forward in time, only not far enough, since the 1939 New York World's Fair can be seen from the windows. Realizing they cannot land in 1939, the captain decides to reveal the situation to the panicked passengers and asks them to pray. In desperation, the captain decides to try again, hoping the third time's a charm. All right, so talent rundown for this episode. The Odyssey of Flight 33 stars John Anderson as Captain Skipper Farver. I recognized him as the car salesman in Psycho. And this is also his second of 4 Twilight Zone episodes. He previously played Gabriel in A Passage for Trumpet. And the next we'll see of him is in the episode Of Late I Think of Cliffordville from season 4. And he also appeared in one episode of The Outer Limits in 1963 called Nightmare. Co-starring as First Officer Craig is Paul Comey. This is his second of 3 Twilight Zone episodes. First is People Are Alike All Over, and the next episode will be The Parallel in season 4. Sandy Kenyon plays Navigator Hatch, and this is his first of 3 Twilight Zone episodes. Next we'll see of him is The Shelter next season in season 3, which that's an episode I am very excited about because I just recently discovered or I caught wind of what that plot is, and I realized that it's something that The Simpsons handled, and it's I think that I have high hopes for that episode. Anyway, Sandy Kenyon was also in Serling's Playhouse 90 episode, A Town Has Turned to Dust, which I covered in a previous episode of the podcast. He also appeared in one episode of One Step Beyond in 1959 called Frontrunner, which, by the way, One Step Beyond, all the episodes are available on Amazon Prime. So if you want to get a taste of another sci-fi anthology from the same era as the Twilight Zone, check it out on Amazon Prime. I've actually watched a few episodes. It's not bad. And then also, Sandy Kenyon also appeared in one episode of The Outer Limits in 1964 titled Counterweight. And rounding out the cast is Wayne Heffley as Second Officer Wyatt. This is his first of 2 Twilight Zones. Next we'll see of him is Black Leather Jackets in season 5. Writer for this episode was Rod Serling, with some assistance from his brother Robert Serling. Serling originally developed the idea for the episode when he learned that American Airlines had a mock-up of a 707 interior that was previously used for flight attendant training that they would make available to TV or film production companies. And the kind of anecdote of that is that, according to the Twilight Zone Companion by Mark Zicree, he and his brother Robert were hanging out, I guess. I don't know. It's just a weird, hanging out in the 50s. But they were, or 60s, I guess, at this point. But anyway, they went to Rod's house, and I guess Rod had picked up some mail, and one of the mails was a brochure from American Airlines saying that, oh, hey, we have this cockpit if you want to license it for a film or TV production. And the way that it's told in the Twilight Zone companion is that Rod kind of like that got the gears turning in Rod's head, and he was like kind of like that was the only piece of mail that he opened, and then he and Robert were going somewhere, and he told Robert that he was to drive, and according to Robert Serling, that never happened. Like Rod always drove, so. Yeah, so anyway, he kind of the machinations, his wheels kept spinning, and then he asked his brother, Robert Serling, just questions about like what would happen if this happened in an airplane and everything. So that led to Robert Serling helping Rod with the cockpit dialogue for the show. He basically was given, I guess, parameters by Rod, and Robert wrote out or dictated some dialogue given the situation and everything. I guess he had discussed the show's premise with a Trans-World Airlines captain, and so then he gave the notes to Rod, and then that's why we get such clear and authentic dialogue, aviation dialogue in this episode. And it's worth knowing that Robert Serling was an aviation writer. Like he wrote stories based on aviation and stuff, so that's pretty cool. This kind of collaboration also didn't end with the Twilight Zone. He also helped Rod with some dialogue in the television movie in 1966 called The Doomsday Flight, which is basically, I think it's a story where aboard a flight there's a bomb, and if the plane goes below a certain altitude, it explodes. Kind of like Speed in the air, but several decades before. So, which that I'm not going to make that Simpsons reference anyway. And that was meant to be the Doomsday Flight. Is that here we go? The Doomsday Flight. The Doomsday Flight is available in its entirety on YouTube, by the way. It was actually going to be the bonus review for this episode, but I don't have the time to do the bonus reviews anymore, so apologies on that. Or at least the bonus episodes bonus reviews as I used to do them. So I don't know. I'm kind of having some. I don't know. I'm thinking I might do something similar. Not to the extent that I did, but I might bring back bonus reviews to the episodes, but not in the same way that I did before. I might talk about it in a later episode or in the weeks to come. I'm still kind of formulating it in my head. But if you have any feedback, if you want to share it, feel free to email or message me on Facebook or tweet me if you want more than just Twilight Zone here. So anyway, director for this episode was Justice Addis. This is his first of 3 Twilight Zone episodes. Next will be the Rip Van Winkle Caper, which is, I think, in a few weeks here. A couple interesting things about this. Douglas Hayes was originally going to direct this episode, but Justice Addis, according to Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic, was brought in almost at the last minute. Like when he was doing rehearsals and getting everything together, he was signing the paperwork to commit to shooting this episode. According to Martin Grams Jr., there's no indication of why Douglas Hayes backed out or was removed. So that's kind of a mystery. Another interesting thing about Justice Addis that I found really interesting was that he was the life partner of actor Hayden Rourke, who played Sykes, the character that was going to bet the money from the bank loan on the horses in A Penny for Your Thoughts a few weeks ago. Kind of interesting. I don't know, just kind of interesting that two openly gay men lived together and were life partners in the 60s. Just interesting time to hear that, like that they were, so open and presumably happy together. So that's cool. So, what I knew before going into the Odyssey of Flight 33, the title had me very excited for this episode. I love science fiction, obviously, and I love Lost. Lost is one of my favorite shows of all time. And so seeing a Twilight Zone episode that has to do with a plane kind of had my mind kind of wandering a little bit, and I was hoping for a mystery surrounding a plane full of passengers, obviously. And I think what I I understand somewhat what's coming in season 3, but I feel like what I thought this episode was going to have is something that it's going to happen in The Arrival in season 3. So anyway, I was kind of thinking that this episode would be something like that new, I think it's NBC show Manifest, which I haven't watched that, but I'm kind of intrigued by the premise. Apparently it's about a plane that a plane that takes off from one place, and then when they land, they're in a different, like, it's like 7 years in the future or something like that. And there's a whole mystery about, what the hell happened. So I feel like that show may have drawn some inspiration from this episode. And I also found it interesting that this episode, the Odyssey of Flight 33, aired after an episode where a flight number was 22. That's, bare minimum of interesting facts and observations. So hopefully I can elevate this episode a little bit. So anyway, going into the Odyssey of Flight 33, I immediately recognized the pilot. I couldn't place where I knew him from until I looked him up later. John Anderson, of course. I thought like his voice is so distinctive, but I was thinking of Robert Stack when I was listening to him talking and everything. It's kind of sounded like Robert Stack a little bit, but as I said before, I recognized him. I eventually put it together that he was in, A Passage for Trumpet, and he was also in Psycho. And I really loved his performance in this episode. I'll get into that in a bit, but just he has this command of the cockpit, and he has this kind of jovial way about him, but he's also serious, and he's a leader in this episode, and I just really dug his performance and everything. He said, according to Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic, he said that he was surprised when he watched the episode, and he was surprised that he was able to recite all of the technical, as he put it, gobbledygook. So yeah, he seemed like a cool dude. As I said, the cockpit atmosphere, very jovial, very laid back, and very friendly and everything. And I feel like the episode did a really spectacular job of showing how well the flight crew works together. Like the pilot mentioning that he's, like he references in his announcement, or his, I think he just says it to, the crew now that I think about it, but he mentions his thanks to a tailwind or something and my brilliant flying, and he says it with like a little bit of a smirk it's laid back. It kind of brings you into a false sense of security with this episode. And then soon after that we get weirdness settling in with him noticing a sensation of speed. And it was kind of interesting to think about that, just the kind of thought exercise that you may not really be able to detect your speed in a plane in the air. I think it kind of speaks to the amount of the force of the tailwind that it was detected and everything. So he's kind of like figuring out like, oh, this is peculiar. Let's kind of investigate it a little bit. And, they reference Idlewild Airport. Of course, this episode was from 1961. Idlewild was renamed JFK International Airport after the assassination in 1963. And it looks like the name change happened about a month after the assassination in November of 63. So I just thought that was mildly interesting. So as this is going down, the flight attendant comes in, and that kind of carries on this jovial, laid back, and professional kind of atmosphere in the cockpit. Like the way that the flight attendant kind of is very good natured, and she has like this playful flirting where she mentions that she's available for a date from an eligible member of the flight crew if there is one, or honorable or something like that. It just kind of reinforces the authenticity. Like there's a chemistry between all of these performers that just feels just so genuine, and coupled with the highly authentic like aviation dialogue, it's just really easy to bring you into this setting and this world. So they recognize that their ground speed is massively increasing. The Navigator, his name in the credits is Navigator Hatch, I believe. Yeah, Navigator Hatch, played by Sandy Kenyon. But the pilot refers to him as Magellan, and I'm like, for a while I was like there's no reference to it or anything, and I was just like, is that like just a nickname because Magellan? I thought it was interesting. I don't know, but anyway, the ground speed is massively increasing, and at this point I kind of started to think, okay, the dialogue is maybe a little too technical, but it still works. Like, it feels authentic, but kind of at the detriment of, I wouldn't say my enjoyment of the episode, but kind of at the detriment of the overall episode, like bringing us into it, bringing us into the fold. It feels more like we're watching people that are highly trained and everything doing their work, rather than experiencing what's happening to them with them, if that makes sense. Like, it's almost too technical, because I was like thinking like, okay, well, like, it kind of got me wondering, like, what's the difference between ground speed and airspeed? And kind of the different technical aspects of it just kind of felt like we were observing rather than participating in the story. So, but on the flip side of that, it still feels authentic, and it kind of still showcases the professionalism of the flight crew. And it's evident by the way that Serling says in the opening narration that they're a trained, cool, highly effective team. And that comes through really well. And kind of going back to my comment about airspeed and ground speed and everything, just to clear that up, in case you're wondering, I didn't know this per se. I mean, it's pretty kind of obvious by context, but airspeed, according to Google, is the vector difference between the ground speed and the wind speed. So when it's kind of perfectly still out, the airspeed is equal to the ground speed, because there's no wind kind of slowing down the aircraft. But if the wind is blowing in the same direction that the aircraft is moving, the airspeed will be less than the ground speed. So so say, for sake of argument, that you're flying along at according to Google, 150 knots into a 10 knot headwind. You'll be moving through the air at 150 knots, but only moving along the ground at 140 knots. And true airspeed is the airspeed at which the aircraft is moving through the air. So that kind of, I guess, clarifies or gets more information to the pilot's line later in the episode, where he says that, well, airspeed is the only one that really matters. So at this point, I was wondering if they were ever going to land the plane, or if the episode was going to be contained completely to the cockpit set. I was wrong on both counts, and also just to mention, I assume I would assume it would have to be stock footage, but the shots of the exterior of the plane just demonstrates just how, like, I don't know exactly how to articulate it, or articulate why I feel this way, but just it really did a good job of demonstrating just how big the plane is. Like, it's clearly a jet airliner, that's looks pretty massive and everything. So anyway, in Serling's narration, I kind of found it interesting that he references the title. Like, it's not like he was referencing a turn of phrase that happens to also be the title of the episode. He was specifically telling us that this episode is called The Odyssey of Flight 33. And I just found that interesting. I can't remember offhand, like, anytime. I'm sure that he's done that before, especially this deep into the series, but I just can't remember it. I can't remember a specific example of that. But yeah, the way he phrases it is that it's what you're about to see we call the Odyssey of Flight 33. It kind of reminds me of his advertisements at the end of each episode, advertising the next week's episode. But it's interesting that's in the opening narration. So, also in the opening narration, I do want to point out that he said, "But what you've just seen occur inside the cockpit of this plane is no reflection of the aircraft or the crew. It's a safe, well-engineered, perfectly designed machine, and the men you've just met are a trained, cool, highly efficient team." So, I kind of wonder, and I don't think this is the case, because I have not been able to find anything to this effect, but I kind of wonder if that was maybe intentional wording by Serling to kind of just because the cockpit set they were using was from American Airlines, and maybe he felt like he should mention that the plane is safe, just to not get any pushback from the airline or the studio or anything. I kind of wondered, there was nothing in my research to indicate that was ever a thing, so it's purely conjecture on my part, but I kind of wonder, like a little piece of in the back of my mind, there's a little kind of thought that could be it. So after the opening narration, and at this point, we get the flight attendant kind of coaching Paula, the other flight attendant, to make sure that she doesn't alert the passengers of anything that's wrong. And this, I thought, was a nice scene. Like, these actresses are really good at their roles in this episode, and I think that this scene in particular was kind of a classic, like, customer service kind of put on a smile in the face of concern or eerie or supernatural situations. Then we get our one and only scene with the passengers. I believe it's it has to, speaking scenes with the passengers. And I got excited because I was like, oh, sweet, we're going to learn about the passengers. And then, like, there was going to be subplots involving the passengers. And I was kind of bummed that doesn't go anywhere. Like, the one scene that we have is a British guy talking with a talkative neighbor on the plane in the seat next to him. And that's when, like, the passengers notice the speed and increasing and everything. And that's kind of they kind of realize, like, oh, something's amiss here. And I don't know. It's just kind of too bad that we don't get to learn about the passengers or see their perspective on the situation at all. But I mean, I get it. Like, this is a very tightly written episode. Like, the pacing is pitch perfect. So I don't know how they could have possibly fit in any subplots involving the passengers or the passengers' reactions, or if we even really needed it, because we get enough of the tension and everything from the flight crew that I feel like if we were to see anything from the passengers, it would just be redundant and not constructive to the narrative of the episode anyway, because we've got that sensation and that tension from the flight crew who are working to do that. We know that the plane is filled with passengers. We know that it's, we know what the stakes are. I guess we don't really need to see panic throughout the passengers, but I still kind of think that it's there was something missing just a little bit here. Like the one scene, I could have maybe stood to take like one or two other scenes as well, in addition to that scene with members of the passengers and to see what was going on behind the cockpit. But like I said, I get it. It's a minor gripe. I don't know. It's a minor gripe, but it doesn't derail the story or per se, or derail my enjoyment of the episode. And so on that note, I like the tension a lot. So the kind of simple way that the signature, like Twilight Zone change or weird occurrence, the simple way that that's implemented in the episode goes such a long way. Like, when we couple that with the flight crew, who is aware, they're more aware of the specifics of why it's irregular. Like, they notice, like, oh, we're going really fast through this, like, this tailwind is picking up a ridiculous amount of speed, or we've just broken the sound barrier. Like, if we get the passengers perspective on that, it's a completely different story, because they don't, like, presumably they won't know, like, okay, they don't know the specifics of air travel or the mechanics of aviation and everything. So they wouldn't be able to kind of know specifically what's wrong. And that's one of the strengths of the episode, is that we're there with the flight crew. Even though I mentioned that the dialogue is a little too technical for that, we're still there and experiencing it, and we're in their perspective. So at this point they break the sound barrier. And I really liked, that's kind of I don't want to say that's the biggest special effect, because obviously the dinosaur is a big one, but when they break through the sound barrier, that scene in general is really great because that's when they're starting to bicker, kind of in a professional manner, but they're still like, the tension is kind of starting to get to the flight crew in the cockpit, and they're kind of bickering back and forth, trying to figure out what to do, and then they bust through the sound barrier, and like the lighting and the sound effects of that is really good, and it kind of quiets people down, and it kind of shifts to a different stage of the supernatural or the unknowable situation that they're in. And so at this point they reference that they're going 3,000 knots, when earlier they said that 900 was impossible. Just knowing that, I like that piece of writing, because we obviously as the audience, the vast majority of us don't know what the standard is for air travel, or we don't know we don't know specifically like what is abnormal or normal with this particular setting. So establishing that earlier, that, oh, we're going 900, that's 900 knots, I think that was airspeed, yeah, or that might have been ground speed, I don't know, but anyway, 900 knots, that's impossible, and then suddenly, like, a little bit later, they're going 3,000, like, that's unreal, like, that's unimaginable, and I like that's a good way to kind of signal to us just how severe their situation is. And when the pilot is talking about lowering the altitude to get their bearings by just visuals, he says, we'll run smack dab into other flight paths. Like, that idea alone is freaking terrifying to me. Like, the idea that they're obviously above this overcast, they can't see anything below them. Like, the idea, like, you think about it, there are hundreds of flights at any given time in the air. Like, it's kind of an impressive feat of human engineering. Like, there's, it's kind of crazy to think like, oh my God, there's, people are just flying in metal tubes in the air all day, every day, and all night. It's crazy to me. But anyway, so the idea that they are in such dire straits that they need to abandon their flight path and go down and just make visual recognition of like where they are and figure out how to land from there is just terrifying, because just the thought of, going down through the clouds and then possibly like crossing paths with another flight plan, it's like, it's nuts. It's absolutely terrifying to me. But I love the pilot's whole demeanor. Like I said earlier, he's a leader. John Anderson does a fantastic job here. It makes me want to kind of revisit his performance in A Passage for Trumpet and Psycho for that matter. But he's just got this just cool, calm, collect, but earnest and straightforward kind of way about him that comes into play later when he announces like what's going on to the passengers. I just love his demeanor. I think John Anderson did a fantastic job. So they lower their altitude and they see Manhattan Island, but there are no landmarks or anything. The way that they put it is that it's like, that's Manhattan Island, but everything's gone. Like all the buildings and people have disappeared. And I wouldn't say this is a gripe or nitpick or anything, but just I kind of wish, part of me just kind of wishes that there was a way that they could have shown that, like the way that they showed the dinosaur. I kind of wish that they could have shown just a shot of prehistoric Manhattan. Like, I think that would have been really cool, but that's fine. It's fine that they didn't or couldn't, or it wasn't part of the episode. But the next shot is maybe, like, this is what, episode 54 of the Twilight Zone, I think? And the shot of the Brontosaurus was it got probably one of the biggest reactions out of me when watching when watching the Twilight Zone for this whole podcast. Every episode that's preceded this, I have not reacted as bigly, oh my God, I have as strongly as I did when I saw the freaking dinosaur. Like, I wrote in all caps on my notes, what? Dinosaurs? And then, ha 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 ha, over and over again. I was like, I had to pause it, and I was just like, this is insane. Like, I had no idea that they were traveling back into, like, I knew that there was some time travel involved, because when I went to play the episode on Netflix, cause I was too lazy to put in the disc, for my DVD set, when I went to play it on Netflix, it shows like I just caught time travel or traveling through time or whatever in the plot description. So that was on me, but I had no idea that that's what was going to happen, and I was so delighted by that. It was just such a cool, shot and such a cool moment, and yeah, it was definitely super unexpected to me. I loved it. It was fantastic. And at this point, I kind of started, like, this was such a fun episode for me because, like I said, I'm a huge fan of Lost. And, I'm also a huge fan of Stephen King, and it's, as evidenced by the fact that I have a podcast called Tower Junkies, which you can check out at towerjunkiespod.com. But anyway, but one of my Stephen King blind spots is The Langoliers, which is a novella that he had, which was in one of his short story collections, maybe Skeleton Crew or Four Past Midnight, I don't know. But anyway, that was from 1990, and that was obviously adapted into a movie called The Langoliers, and it's very much, it's, from what I understand, because it's one of my blind spots, I haven't seen or watched it, but it is very similar to, like, this, it's basically this premise. And apparently it references, the novella references this episode of The Twilight Zone. But anyway, at this point, like, this plot device, this idea that this plane filled with passengers, that we see once or twice, is kind of just like going through this scenario, traveling backwards through time or traveling through time, completely by accident, is so interesting to me. One of my favorite episodes from season 1 was The Last Flight, and it's kind of similar, they both, the only real similarity is that it involves planes and time travel. But I love time travel as a concept. And like I said before, Lost is one of my favorite shows of all time. And I've lamented that there's like as many years that have passed since Lost went off the air in 2010. I don't think any show has been able, like, networks have tried so hard to recapture the lightning in a bottle that was Lost, and they can't do it. But I feel like the premise of this episode, like, I would totally be up for seeing it repurposed, or updated and made into a Lost-style mystery series. And it kind of, I don't want to say it kind of was because it's completely different, but there was a show in 2011 called Terra Nova that I think I may have seen the first episode. No, I don't think I did. I've never watched it. But anyway, the plot description of that is that it centers on the Shannons, an ordinary family from 2149 when the planet is dying, who are transported back 85 million years to prehistoric Earth, where they join Terra Nova, a colony of humans with a second chance to rebuild a civilization, or to build a civilization. Yeah, so it's kind of just tangentially similar to this. But anyway, I dug this plot device, this situation, everything. I thought it was really interesting. And so at this point, when they realize that, we can't land here. Like, there's no way to do this. Like, there's no way for us to, we need to go back, essentially. Not to quote Lost, but, so they try to reverse it, which I feel like oh crap. There was an episode of the original Star Trek that kind of did the same thing, where they had to just kind of reverse some kind of time travel thing. Maybe almost a very similar plot, now that I think about it. Cause I remember there was an episode where the Enterprise is in like the 60s or something. But anyway, when they try to reverse it, I just love the demeanor of the flight crew. Like, this is their job. They're doing their job in the face of an incredibly, abnormal and terrifying situation. And when they go back and they go through the tailwind again and through the presumable wormhole of time, it works. And like they realize that they go through it, and it is all the same trappings of what happened before happen again. So they think, oh, it worked. And at that point, I was just like, that was kind of anticlimactic. I kind of felt like, in the moment, I kind of felt like I wanted them to kind of not live in prehistoric times, but like have like some kind of, I thought that that's the direction that the episode was going to go, that they were going to land and it was going to be like a Sound of Thunder kind of story. But then immediately I was like, well, okay, so since it worked, obviously they're not in their normal time, and immediately after that they're like, yep, we're in 1939. It's the New York World's Fair. This is kind of crazy, and I don't know, like I do, like. Even though I thought for a brief moment that it could have been cool for like kind of a prehistoric, like seeing an aircraft in prehistoric times is an interesting idea, and I would have been satisfied with a storyline that took place in prehistoric times with their air travel and everything, kind of a Flight of the Phoenix kind of thing where they try to, they land there or whatever. But anyway, what we got, though, like, I love that idea. I like the idea of them trying to reverse it, and really the entire concept of this aerial Flying Dutchman story. Deep down, it's absolutely terrifying. Like, it is a horrifying premise. I don't have much anxiety about flying. I really don't. When I said in my Nightmare at 30,000 Feet review last week, I mean, I haven't done like any like transatlantic flights or anything, or I haven't flown across the pond, as it were. But I've flown across the continental United States, and I don't have any anxiety over that. I like flights because I can just sit there and listen to audiobooks or podcasts or whatever. I don't have any anxiety about flying. Like, I don't. But there is something that's inherently frightening about this specific story. Like the idea of like there's this ticking clock that's occurring in this. Like they can't land until they're in their right place. Like they just can't do it. And so there's this ticking clock of fuel, and it's in the dialogue a little bit, but it's also kind of, that's one of my small gripes about the technical aspect of that, because while we have the speed reading as good content, providing good context and everything, when they get a check on how much fuel they have, they say like, oh, we have however many 1,000 gallons or whatever. We don't get the context of that. We don't know where that is. Like, is it at a full tank of gas? Is it a half tank of gas? Are they gonna have to stop at the gas station? Like what is the time frame of that? And like there is a line where John Anderson says that it guzzles fuel and everything, but again, we don't have like a we don't have like it's this ticking clock that we can't see the display of. Like, and I think that that's somewhat to the detriment of it. Like, it could have been more tense if we had like a literal ticking clock of fuel and everything. But that just the thought of that alone is what makes this whole premise frightening to me, because it goes against like the structure of air travel. Like, okay, we're gonna take off from here, we're gonna land here at this time. Enjoy your flight. Here's some peanuts. But the idea that they are lost in the sky is absolutely just terrifying to me. And I really appreciate the episode for that, with some caveats. But anyway, so after that, the flight attendant comes back into the cockpit, and she asks the pilot to make an announcement because the passengers are, as she says, nearly hysterical. And then she references two kids that have everyone kind of like climbing the walls. And I don't know, that line it didn't necessarily, it's not that it didn't sit well with me, it just kind of reinforced how much I kind of wish that there had been more scenes with the passengers. Like, I would have liked to have seen like just a shot of the passengers, not necessarily panicking, but just noticing and realizing just like how much trouble they're in. But again, like the episode is paced really well, so I don't know how they could have possibly incorporated that into the final product. So it's kind of a catch-22. Like, I wanted more, but I recognize that the episode probably would have suffered if they included more. And the final product of what we got is by my count, a spectacularly well-paced piece of television. So when the pilot makes his final announcement, though, he makes throughout the episode he makes three announcements to the passengers, I believe. One is the first two show just the cabin. They show the passengers in their seats. But the final one is just a close-up to the speakers. And I thought that was really weird and kind of, it didn't really fit well with me. in the episode, because when he makes that final announcement, because the camera is just like showing the speakers above the, I don't know if it's technically even the speakers. Now that I think about it, but just like the overhead, ceiling, above the seats and everything is just panning across that. It's a close up of that, so you don't see any of the passengers. I really thought that there was going to be something wrong with the passengers, or that it was going to reveal that they had disappeared, which again, we'll see in early next season, I believe. But I just thought that was kind of peculiar. Like, that was a peculiar shot, and I don't understand like why it was. Maybe they didn't get the coverage, of the passengers, or maybe, I don't know. It was kind of, well, I guess if they had shown the passengers, they would have had to have shown them in panic mode, and I think that probably, well, now that I think about it probably would have been a little detrimental to the pacing and the energy of the episode, because when we get that final announcement, the pilot's saying like, okay, well, it's time to bring the passengers in on it. And by the way, I love that concept of ending it on that fact. Like, he's out of ideas. Like this whole idea, like they're completely out of ideas. So he's bringing it in and bringing them into it. I just realized I think I just skipped like a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't really have any notes for. But anyway, I just like that he's bringing them into this scenario and everything, and it's kind of like this group kind of thing, which again kind of reinforces this idea that I have, that like it would be cool to see this type of story played out in a Lost style mystery show, because it's kind of a communal thing, or there's hints of like a communal kind of thing as they go through this terrible journey and cursed flight, essentially. But to kind of backtrack, when they get back to when they're in 1939, the dialogue between the LaGuardia tower, I guess, is good. Like, it's all good. Like, when they realize that like they don't know what radar is, they don't know what they're talking about when they said it's a jet. Like, all that's good. It's good stuff and everything. I don't know if I don't know if it necessarily left me wanting like the LaGuardia people to realize that, like maybe see the plane and be like, oh crap, this thing has like 4 massive engines. This is nuts. But again, that kind of would go against the kind of aesthetic of the entire episode, because it's all contained to this plane, and I really dug that part of this episode, or that aspect of this episode. So anyway, kind of winding down, really, the kind of terror in the whole tragedy of this entire episode is the thought that Global 33 is going to run out of fuel, and it's absolutely terrifying. And I absolutely love that this episode ends not on a cliffhanger, but just it's an open-ended episode. The situation isn't resolved at all, and we're just left we're left in the tailwind, I guess, of the story, and we're left with Serling's really ominous closing narration, where he says, you and I know what's happened, so if any moment, you hear the sound of jet engines flying atop the overcast, engines that sound searching and lost, engines that sound desperate, shoot up a flare or do something. That would be Global 33 trying to get home from the Twilight Zone. And I absolutely love that closing narration, and that idea, like the idea that the ending of this episode is so abstract and open-ended, and it's just unresolved. That's the word I'm looking for. It's so unresolved, and the idea that, okay, this flight, this cursed flight is still crossing the skies above us for presumably eternity, I guess, or until the fuel runs out and they crash and die. But it's I love that. I love the episode for that. Yeah, and I think that will do it for this, not this episode, Jesus. The review portion of this episode. Trivia for the Odyssey of Flight 33. I mentioned the Flying Dutchman. So this whole episode is a modern retelling of the Flying Dutchman myth, which, according to Wikipedia, the Flying Dutchman is a legendary ghost ship that can never make port and is doomed to sail the oceans forever. My context for the Flying Dutchman, or my association with the Flying Dutchman, is that it is referenced in the Pirates of the Caribbean film series that had like one good movie and a bunch of not so good movies. The Brontosaurus model and miniature jungle set in the episode came from the 1960 film Dinosaurs. Well, it didn't come from the film. So the 1960 film Dinosaurs had the Brontosaurus model in a miniature jungle set that was used for the stop motion animation in this episode. So the actual special effect, I guess, I want to say I read somewhere, I didn't put it in my notes, but I read somewhere that this was one of the costliest special effects shot in the entire run of the Twilight Zone. And to kind of further put that in context, they did that all in kind of post-production and everything. So they basically, it's not that they were reusing footage from it, but they had, I guess, commissioned the staff of what was it, Project Unlimited. I believe they were a special effects crew, I guess, or a animation department or company. But they were creating footage for Dinosaurs from the 1960 Universal film. And so basically the Twilight Zone had commissioned them to create footage of the dinosaur in the jungle specifically for the Twilight Zone. It was stop motion animation. They just needed less than 60 seconds of footage. So sorry. And that's what they would need. So the entire cost of the special effects, that special effects shot was came to a total of $3,940. And that's in 1961. That's nuts. To put it into context, the highest paid actor for this episode was John Anderson, who received $800 for his work in this episode. And like, that's kind of nuts to me. Kind of crazy. So anyway, that's neat. And I mentioned a lot about how I kind of wish that there was more to do with the passengers and more information about the passengers of the plane. And it's interesting to note that this episode was one of several Twilight Zone stories that was adapted as a graphic novel. And apparently the adaptation, the graphic novel, expands upon the story by including a subplot involving several passengers and flight crew. And apparently it also updates the story to take place in 1973. I have ordered the graphic novel from Amazon, and I will report back on how it is in a future episode. Some other, I think they're maybe out of print now, because these are from a while ago. I think I had to buy this one from a third-party seller on Amazon, but I'm so kind of bummed, or it's now on my radar, that there's Monsters Are Due on Maple Street graphic novel from the same company and everything, and the same thing. By the way, look up these things, these graphic novels, because the cover art is spectacular. Like, it looks beautiful, very colorful and vibrant, in like the way that the people are drawn, and it's just like there's such a uniqueness to it that I can't really put my finger on. But it's just, they're gorgeous graphic novel covers. But I really want to get my hands on the Monsters Are Due on Maple Street one, because that's my favorite episode so far. And I want to see how it translates to the graphic novel. So maybe someday I'll find it cheaper, because I think on Amazon, like through the third party thing, it was like $30 or something. I was like, I can't justify that. But anyway, I'll report back on the graphic novel when it comes in. Also, speaking of graphic novels, I kind of went on a little bit of a treat myself kind of thing, where I ordered the J. Michael Straczynski Twilight Zone graphic novels. I believe it's only 3 volumes. The first 2 volumes actually came today, and I think tomorrow or next week the third volume will come in the mail. But I'm really excited to check those out. I'm looking at them now, and they look pretty cool. So that's pretty awesome. So yeah, overall, the Odyssey of Flight 33, I really, really enjoyed this episode. I really dug it. It was very thrilling in a very unique kind of contained way. Like it's like the episode is contained to the cockpit set and the cabin set, and with some exterior shots and some obviously the almost $4,000 special effects shot of a dinosaur. But it is completely contained to the story of the flight crew, and this flight crew, again, it's the chemistry and the energy that these actors bring to their roles is just outstanding to me. Like it is a standout of this episode that these performers performed this well and felt so genuine and authentic. And part of that is due to the very authentic, at times a little too technical dialogue and everything, courtesy of Robert Serling. But I think that without the chemistry and the atmosphere of their performance, with lesser chemistry in the cockpit, I think that this episode could have failed miserably, and could have just felt like a training video or technical video or whatever. But since the actors brought their A game, it really stands out as a very unique and interesting episode to me. On that note, actually, John Anderson said that, quote, this is from Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic, he said, quote, "We looked damn serious doing that show, but we had a blast filming that. The guys playing my co-pilots were great. The director had trouble getting us settled because we were having so much fun. When you see me looking out at the dinosaur, I'm really looking at the poor director. As soon as he'd yell cut, we were cracking jokes again. We were confined to this little cockpit. Whenever the director said, 'There's a dinosaur,' we had to pretend that it was out there. I saw the episode recently and I was amazed. I was able to spew out the technical gobbledygook, which I mentioned earlier." So, yeah, that is just about it for this episode, I think. So, I did mention earlier, I think, in this recording, that I was thinking about doing, maybe not, I don't know. I don't know if I'd say restructuring or anything, but I had an idea for the podcast going forward, and I don't know if I'll pull the trigger on this, but I just wanted to put this out there that I really loved doing the bonus reviews each episode, but it got kind of cumbersome, and like sometimes I would get stressed out, like thinking like, okay, I don't know what title from, the 50s and 60s I could grab out of like the internet and everything to comment on and everything. So one of the other things that I've done recently is I bought the first 2 and only seasons of the original Outer Limits on DVD, which I'm beating myself up because why didn't I get them on Blu-ray? I don't know why I did that. But I also bought Science Fiction Theater, the complete series, which Science Fiction Theater ran from 1955 to 1957. It was George McFly's favorite show, according to Back to the Future. But I also picked up Science Fiction Theater, A Complete History of the Television Program, or whatever it's called, by Martin Grimm Jr., who wrote Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic. And I was thinking, here in a few weeks, I'm considering bringing back bonus reviews, but instead of doing like bonus reviews that are related in some way to the episode of the Twilight Zone that I'm reviewing, what if I just go through Science Fiction Theater and do like mini bonus reviews as I go along the Twilight Zone? And my kind of thought for that is that when I started this podcast freaking 4 years ago, sorry for the hiatuses, guys, I swear. When I started this podcast, my idea was when I get through the Twilight Zone, I'm going to do the Outer Limits. And when I get through the Outer Limits, I'm going to go back and do Science Fiction Theater or One Step Beyond or some other, like Tales of Tomorrow, like other just classic science fiction anthology shows. But obviously, that era of television, first of all, it's not easily accessible. I'm fortunate that they have a complete series box set DVD of Science Fiction Theater, and that One Step Beyond is available on Amazon Prime. But I don't know, it's kind of harder to find. But also, the Twilight Zone and the Outer Limits, those are the big dogs. Those are the 2 big shows from that era. And my thought is, and maybe this is sharing too much or whatever, but let me know what you guys think. But my thought is that dedicate, like, I would be better served sticking to the Twilight Zone and the Outer Limits, and maybe eventually way down the road, another 4 or 5 years, covering the, like, 80s and 90s reboots of each respective show, and not sticking to the classic structure. So my thought is pairing, like, I would basically do the Twilight Zone episode just like I did this episode, just like I do every episode, same amount of work, same amount of commitment to it, and then end the show with a bonus review of an episode of Science Fiction Theater in chronological order. Something I'm mulling over. I don't know if I'm going to pull the trigger on it. I really don't know if I'm going to pull the trigger on it, because even if I'm not as diving as deep into those episodes as I am with the Twilight Zone, it's still a little bit of work, and I don't want to get burnt out or go on any other hiatuses or anything. So anyway, and also another side of that is that Science Fiction Theater is not easily accessible unless you have the DVD set, and I don't know. It's kind of a thing. If you guys are interested in hearing me talk briefly about episodes of Science Fiction Theater, kind of as a cool down for the episode, or if you just want me to stick to the Twilight Zone, let me know. Just shoot me an email, matt@obsessiveviewer.com, tweet me at OVAnthologyPod, or send me a message on Facebook at facebook.com/anthologypod. And let me know what you think. It's something that I'm kind of throwing out there, and I'm kind of thinking about, yeah. And another thing about it is that Rochelle, from Germany, one of my listeners, had emailed, and I need to email her back. I'm so sorry, Rochelle, if you're listening. I'm so sorry. I've just been busy, but, she had mentioned that, like, she had lamented the loss of the bonus reviews and everything. So I'm kind of thinking that this might be a fun, like, middle ground, to do this. It wouldn't be spoiler reviews or anything. Like I said, it won't be a deep dive, but I've seen a couple episodes of Science Fiction Theater, and I'm enjoying it. And I feel like, I don't know, I feel like it could be a fun bonus for each episode. So let me know what you think. Yeah. And I'll make a decision, in the coming weeks. Probably those probably wouldn't start until like, June, maybe. But anyway, that'll do it for this episode of Anthology. Thank you guys so much for listening. I really appreciate, you guys taking the time to let me, say these nonsense words into your ears. This episode is gonna, like, if you're listening this day of the release, then it's Wednesday. Happy Wednesday. But tomorrow, the new Twilight Zone episode comes out, replay, episode 3 from the first season, and I'm really hoping that I can commit to watching it and reviewing it and getting a bonus episode released on Friday. So be looking on the feed for that. And if it is past that and you're in the future, check out the archive at anthologypod.com/archive. So that'll do it for this episode. Thank you guys so much for listening, and thank you so much for bearing with me as I go through my crazy, neurotic thoughts for plans for the future of the podcast. Yeah, so thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll see you next time. And now, here's a clip from a recent episode of Tower Junkies, a podcast exploring the work of Stephen King from ObsessiveViewer.com. That's what I was like. So I want like an anthology series with standalone episodes based on the works of Stephen King. I would want that.
Yeah.
And it's asking a lot because we already have a lot of stuff: Castle Rock, the It adaptations, Pet Sematary, new books every year, pretty much. Mm-hmm. Like, we are very spoiled. But God, how great would that be?
That'd be cool.
Yeah, it would be awesome, and it would be the perfect marriage of Tower Junkies and anthology. Obsessive viewers, you know, that show can do whatever it wants. But
Anthology is edited and produced by Matt Hurt and presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. For a full archive of our episodes, go to anthologypod.com/archive. You can also like the Facebook page at facebook.com/anthologypod and follow the show on Twitter at OVAnthologyPod. If you enjoy the show, please take a couple minutes to leave us a rating and a quick review on Apple Podcasts. This is the easiest way to support what we do, and all it costs is a little bit of your time. If you'd like to donate to the podcast, you can make a PayPal donation at anthologypod.com/donate or support us on Patreon for recurring donations and access to commentary tracks and B-roll audio recorded exclusively for patrons at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. Every donation goes toward paying the fees to keep the podcast running and is greatly appreciated. Official Anthology merch, including shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more, can be found in the Obsessive Viewers TeePublic store. You can find a link to the store in the show notes of this episode and at anthologypod.com/donate. Or you can simply search for Obsessive Viewer at tpublic.com. For information about the Obsessive Viewers annual live event showcasing short horror films from local filmmakers, check out shocktoberinirvington.com. And for an archive of all our events, as well as news about potential future events, head over to obsessiveviewer.com/live. For more podcast content, you can find our flagship movie and TV review and discussion show, The Obsessive Viewer Podcast, at obsessiveviewer.com, and on Twitter at obsessiveviewer. You can also find Tower Junkies, a podcast where Matt and co-host Tiny share their love of all things Stephen King and his magnum opus, The Dark Tower series, over at towerjunkiespod.com and at towerjunkiespod on Twitter. And finally, check out The Secular Perspective, Tiny's side project podcast, which tackles current events and life's big questions from the perspective of secular hosts Chad and Amanda at thesecularperspective.com. Bumper music for this podcast comes courtesy of As Good As It Gets, which can be found at facebook.com/asgoodasitgetsband. You can also find As Good As It Gets music on Spotify, Google Play, and iTunes. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.